Hello, I'm Jonasz RewiÅ. Welcome on board the Eastern Express. As always, I hope you enjoy the journey. In this episode, we're going to talk about Russia's border threats towards Finland. And let's be honest, Russia's saber-rattling is a bit like that bully at school who insists he's going to beat you up, but he's too busy dealing with his own problems to do much more than, shout from a distance. Finland, on the other hand, seems about as concerned as you'd be if your neighbour's Chihuahua threatened your German Shepherd. The 31st country to join NATO has long been cautious of Moscow, and now that preparedness is paying off. So let's take a look at our report to find out more about this situation.
The Russian military command has decided to restation its tactical nuclear missile systems, moving them closer to the Finnish border. Capable of striking targets up to 500 kilometers away, Russia has deployed a brigade of Iskander-M missile launchers along the Finnish border. The move comes as Vladimir Putin seeks to reinforce the newly formed Leningrad military district. Stationed in Karelia, a Russian region bordering Finland, the mobile short-range ballistic missile system is known for its precision. Reaching the speed of approximately 7,500 kilometers per hour, the missiles boast a target accuracy of 30 meters. Built to carry either conventional or nuclear warheads weighing up to 1,500 pounds, the Iskander-M was first used in combat in 2008 during Russia's war with Georgia. Since then, the missile has been used against Ukraine. The formation of a missile brigade is not a chance decision. According to experts, it is, in Russia's eyes, an adequate response to Finland's accession to NATO. Breaking its traditional neutrality policy, Finland infuriated the Kremlin when it joined NATO in April of last year. This prompted the formation of the Leningrad military district. Now, the news of Iskander-M missile systems bolstering the district's capabilities has further escalated tensions. Finland shares an over 1,335 kilometers long border with Russia, which has been closed by Helsinki since Russia's FSB directed migrants to enter Finland in what Finnish authorities called a hybrid operation. US President Joe Biden and leaders of other NATO countries, along with analysts, have warned that following his full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Vladimir Putin could look to attack alliance member countries, a notion that the Russian dictator has rejected.
And now, as always, it's time to explore the issue in greater detail. So, let's begin. Finland has warned that it's facing hybrid threats from Russia since it joined NATO, but those threats are more about cyber attacks and weaponized migration than actual troops storming across the border. Speaking of weaponized migration, let's talk about how Russia's been trying to create a little chaos at the Finnish-Russian border by sending over migrants from countries like Yemen, Syria and Somalia. Yes, the same strategy it has been attempting at the Polish-Belarusian border since November 2021. Nevertheless, Finnish border authorities reacted swiftly to the disturbance and ended up closing border points to curb the flow of migrants. Vladimir Putin even threatens to deploy troops along the Finnish border, which would be a big deal considering it's 1,340 kilometers long. Finland is taking this seriously, though. Prime Minister Petteri Orpo is building a fence along a part of the border and increasing patrols. He even invited the European Union's Commission President Ursula von der Leyen to tour the border and talk about finding common solutions to stop Russia's weaponization of migrants. Now, Putin is over here saying that Russia had perfect relations with Finland until it joined NATO. Perfect, you say? Putin's rhetoric is heavy on melodrama, but light on reality. He claims they didn't have troops along the border, but guess what? They removed them to send them to Ukraine. The problem with having troops in two places at once, at least in large quantities, is that it's, impossible, even for Russia. And let's talk about Russian resources, shall we? Putin wants to grow the armed forces to 1.5 million by 2026, but he's struggling to keep 600,000 fighting in Ukraine. Finland is a difficult place to deploy troops, given its swamps and forests, which require special training and equipment that Russia doesn't have. Even Major General Pekka Toveri, a former chief of Finnish military intelligence, said that Russia won't have the resources to build new infrastructure, heavy weaponry or recruit enough forces near the Finnish border until at least the 2030s. And that's not even taking into account that most of their soldiers have been transferred, to Ukraine. So here's the bottom line. Finland isn't panicking because it knows that Russia's threats are just about as reliable as a gas station sushi stand. They are taking precautions, sure, but they're not losing any sleep over it, because at the end of the day, Putin's got more pressing issues to deal with, at least at this moment. And joining us now to shed more light on the subject is Professor Teivo Teivainen, Professor of World Politics at the University of Helsinki. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello, wonderful to be in your studio from a distance.
Good to see you again. So let's begin with Russia's posturing. Is it really all about intimidation? I mean, setting up nukes on somebody else's border, it might be considered to be a very clear signal. But as always with Russia, there is a degree of ambiguity. To what extent do you think this is something new vis-à-vis Finland? Or is it basically just trying to rephrase the same kind of threats that have been there all along in a slightly different, more direct way?
Yes, I think in Finland the mood is that there's nothing unexpected in this. It was obvious that Russia wanted and needed to respond in some ways to what has happened. Finland joined NATO and all that, and they had promised internally and externally to do something. So it's not a really surprising move. Already the establishment of the relatively new Leningrad military district was one step, and now the announced Iskander missiles with the possibility of having nuclear warheads is, of course, something that has an impact. But as such, Russia has had the capability to send nuclear missiles to Finland already before. Most Finns are taking it in fairly relaxed way, at least in public comments by authorities.
And before we actually discuss Russia's military posturing further, you're saying that this response has been, if not muted, then very, as you're saying, relaxed, laid back, perhaps again would not be the best way to phrase it. But one thing that is certain is that Finns are not really fretting about this. They are not really descending into any sort of state of panic. So how is it possible that despite Russia making clear threats, using nuclear weapons, no less, Finland is able to maintain this sort of admirable composure?
Well, when Finland was in the process of joining NATO, there was a lot of talk that the most complicated period might be after Finland sent the application to join NATO and before the process went through and Finland would be accepted in NATO, meaning that sending the application was likely to be perceived in not so nice ways by Russia, and then Finland would not yet have the protection of the 5th article of NATO. So after Finland joined NATO, quite a few people have been thinking, of course, not everybody thinks the same in Finland, but quite a few have been thinking that now, since we have the 5th article protection, most things that Russia does are not so intimidating anymore. Of course, people are aware that in case of major war, Finland is a frontline country and it could be very dangerous and complicated, but normal kind of posturing and moves of troops like right now or missiles is not perceived in any panicked way in Finland.
Would you say that deterrence is the key? I mean, throughout the 1950s, the 1960s, I mean, all these decades leading up to the collapse of the Soviet Union, there has always been a distinct possibility of a great power confrontation. I mean, the Soviet Union was preparing for an outright war, all-out war with NATO countries involving nuclear weapons and their use on the battlefield. Yet, Nothing like that ever happened because deterrence proved to be efficient. Would you say that Finland is actually one country that has learned this lesson and also kept it? Regardless of whether the Soviet Union existed or not, Russia was still perceived as a potential threat, so the Finnish authorities said, look, we're not going to change that much, we're going to keep our attitude of preparedness intact, just in case something happens. Well, most of Western European countries have started their rapid process of disarmament.
Yes, I think what you say mostly corresponds to what has happened in Finland. In Finland, like in some other countries near border with Russia, one fear has been often like, if Russia attacks, will anybody come and help us? So this kind of thinking has existed throughout the independence, the last 100-year or so period. So now that Finland joined NATO, for many people, and many people in Finland support NATO membership, it's kind of, okay, now that part is solved. So it's a big sort of feeling of relief that we can assume that the fifth article protects Finland. So this is more or less how the thinking goes among most parts of Finnish establishment and decision makers, which means like the things that Russia does and threats, they are seen as the president, our fairly new president, Alexander Stubb, that you can see the picture here, said everything's under control when he was asked about the recent moves by Russia about the Iskander missiles and all that.
Would you say that all Nordic countries are adopting the same attitude as Finland? Finland, as we've already established, saw it fit not to degrade its deterrence capabilities. So being prepared for war, even at the time of peace, was perceived as a virtue. And, it pays off right now because Finland is ready for anything. Do you think that other countries in the region have done the same, or did they adopt a different approach?
Well, now especially that President of Finland is visiting Sweden and stated that the relationship between Finland and Sweden is on a stronger basis than ever before, also because of NATO membership of both countries. It seems that in Finland, this perception that NATO will protect us is stronger than in Sweden. In Sweden, there is a little bit more opposition also to the NATO membership as such, and perhaps a perception that it's not 100% clear whether being in NATO is so good for Swedish security, whereas in Finland there's a near consensus, not total consensus, that now an important aspect of Finnish security has been solved. So I think this feeling is stronger in Finland than, let's say, in Sweden, talking about the two countries that recently joined NATO.
Do you think that the threat nowadays lies elsewhere? It doesn't lie with some sort of imminent launch of nuclear warheads against European countries, but instead with the message that Russia is sending. Do you think there is a risk that by placing these warheads in the Karelia region, in Kaliningrad also, earlier on, Belarus too, do you think that some countries or leaders might be tempted to think, well, look, they've got nukes. They are prepared to use them. Maybe we should back down. In other words, trying to break up NATO's unity through the use of propaganda. Do you think that this might actually be the ultimate objective right now? The most realistic one for Russia?
It's possible. I don't see it as a very effective strategy in Finland, where for various reasons the change of public opinion and of foreign policy decision makers was very swift and big. So there's very little questioning. Of course, there is some questioning always about NATO membership, and some of it for good reasons. But in Finland, the overwhelming majority feels quite safe and calm now with NATO membership. So it's not an effective strategy vis-a-vis Finland. Of course, there are other things happening in our border with Russia, like the question of people, refugees or asylum seekers, or other people wanting to cross the border, a little bit like what Poland experienced with Belarus, and this is a very heated debate. And some are actually seeing that perhaps one of the aims of Russia, apart from destabilizing the border by somehow helping or making more refugees or asylum seekers come to the border, the one impact would be to create internal division in Finland and to make Finland sort of step out of long established tradition where Finland says we respect human rights and international treaties, and now the government is actually saying that we should not obey with all international regulations. Our security with the eastern border is more important than our international treaties governing borders and refugees and asylum seekers, and that in itself might be a way to sort of break down rule of law tradition in countries like Finland. So there are many heated debates about the eastern border, but not so much about the missiles right now, much more about the asylum seekers.
So one quick question. Are you optimistic that more European countries will adopt a similar robust approach? Because so far it has seemed, at least during the last decade, before the all-out war against Ukraine, that Russia was this man with a gun walking into a shopping center and aiming it at everyone, and everyone basically thinking, okay, maybe it's better to just let him have what he wants, even though everyone has guns, like, you know, rusting in the backyard, right, but not using them. Do you think that now Western European countries will be more willing to listen to the Baltic states, Finland, countries which know that, you know, you have to be prepared, you have to have deterrence, otherwise Russia is just going to try and do its bullying act all over again?
Well, it's a big question. As we know, there are tensions within Western Europe and in Europe, larger Europe, around that issue. Right now, it seems there might be more willingness also by countries located further from Russia. And this is actually the discourse of, for example, Finnish government right now, emphasizing that if Ukraine needs Patriot defense systems and all that, also countries that are not facing Russia from close distance, like Finland and to some extent Poland, but countries further to the west, that they need to chip in and they need to have a stronger attitude of uniting against Russian threat. As we know, it's never going to be 100% unity on that issue, and the forthcoming European Parliament elections might also play a role there. Let's see what kind of parties we will be strengthened in the European Parliament. That will certainly also have one impact on the debate.
So most certainly it will be an opportunity, also perhaps a threat, because Russia may try to do some meddling, as it always does. Until then, however, Professor Teivo Teivainen was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your expertise.
Thank you.
And now we're moving on to Eastern News Flash, bringing you all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. Lithuania plans to follow in Poland's footsteps and cooperate with Ukraine in its efforts to conscript Ukrainian men living abroad, said the Baltic nation's Minister of Defense. In doing so, he cited Ukraine's urgent need of boosting its own mobilization reserves.
According to Kastunas, men of conscription age staying abroad is unfair to those citizens who are fighting to defend their country, and added that there are not many such people in Lithuania. On Tuesday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky signed a new mobilization law approved by the Ukrainian parliament on the 11th of April. On the same day, Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba announced that the same set of rules applies to men of mobilization age both at home and abroad. He stressed that staying abroad does not release one from one's obligations towards the state. Consequently, Ukrainian foreign consulates stopped providing their services to men aged 18 to 60.
Probably Germans.
Central Asian states are focusing on breaking down trade barriers in order to establish a unified regional market. The initiative caught the attention of the Kremlin, concerned about potential partners bypassing Russia as a result.
The region's so-called B5+1 process, backed by the US, aims to foster regional free trade and diversify export routes between the 5 Central Asian states. Recent diplomatic efforts between Uzbekistan and Tajikistan have resulted in agreements to streamline customs procedures and boost trade. Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan followed suit, also signing agreements to enhance cross-border movement and trade. However, challenges persist, particularly between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, where border disputes hinder trade flow. Moscow remains skeptical about the feasibility of a functional regional market, emphasizing the importance of bilateral agreements over multilateral approaches. Despite not always seeing eye to eye, Central Asian leaders are actively addressing trade barriers to enhance regional economic integration.
The European Parliament has adopted a resolution refusing to recognize the results of the Russian presidential elections. The legislative body also called on all EU member states to further limit relations with Russian leader Vladimir Putin.
The EP pointed out the lack of alternative candidates, no independent media coverage or observers, and stifled political freedom during the elections. As a consequence, they were deemed illegitimate and undemocratic. As part of the resolution, the European Parliament also urged EU member states to provide humanitarian visas and other support to dissenting Russians. During that same session, the European Parliament overwhelmingly supported a resolution condemning Georgia's controversial foreign agents law. Georgia's parliament passed the controversial bill during its first parliamentary reading on April 17th, despite widespread protests. The piece of legislation, which must be voted on 2 more times before it becomes law, would require organizations that receive even partial foreign funding to be labeled as foreign agents.
A Russian court issued an arrest warrant for Garry Kasparov, former chess champion, opposition politician and co-founder of the Free Russia Forum. He's accused of creating and leading a terrorist group.
The court also issued arrest warrants on the same charge for several other Russian opposition politicians and activists in exile. Last month, Russia added Kasparov to its list of terrorists and extremists. This tactic is generally used by the Kremlin to dubiously legitimize brutal crackdowns on political opponents. Kasparov, a former world chess champion and an unspoken Kremlin critic, lives in the United States. Following the death of Alexei Navalny, he is one of the Kremlin's biggest critics alive.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates. I'm Jonasz RewiÅ. Bye for now.